September 19th, 1944, Rechicourt-la-Petite, France. Lieutenant Edwin Leeper peered through the morning fog, his M18 Hellcat tank destroyer idling in a shallow depression just off the road to Moncourt. The mist clung to the ground like wet wool, reducing visibility to perhaps 30 feet. In the turret behind him, his gunner maintained absolute silence. They had been warned. German armour was pushing toward their position. Panzers, possibly Panthers. Then Leeper saw it. A gun muzzle, emerging from the fog like a steel finger pointing directly at his position, 30 feet away. The range at which armour thickness and gun calibre ceased to matter. The range at which survival depended not on protection, but on speed. The range at which two fundamentally different philosophies of armoured warfare were about to collide. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from. Today, Leeper deployed his platoon. 4 M18 Hellcats against an unknown number of German tanks advancing through the fog. What happened in the next 5 minutes would challenge everything the Wehrmacht believed about American tank destroyers. 5 German tanks of the 113th Panzer Brigade destroyed, 1 M18 lost. Then the fog began to lift, and the real killing started. The mathematics of the encounter seemed impossible. American tank destroyers with armour no thicker than 1 inch, barely enough to stop rifle fire, facing German Panthers with 80 mm of sloped frontal armour, effectively 140 mm of protection. The Panther's 75 mm gun could destroy an M18 from over a mile away. The M18's 76 mm gun struggled to penetrate a Panther's front, even at point-blank range. Yet by the end of September 19th, Company C of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had knocked out 19 German tanks. When the battle for Arracourt concluded 3 days later, the Americans had destroyed 39 Panzers. 7 Hellcats were lost, 4 destroyed, 3 damaged. The disparity seemed to violate the fundamental rules of armoured combat. Lighter vehicles do not defeat heavier ones. Thinner armour does not triumph over thicker. Smaller guns do not overcome larger, unless speed changes everything. The story of how American tank destroyers achieved the impossible begins not with the M18 Hellcat, but with a profound misunderstanding of how Germany would wage war. In 1941, the United States Army watched German panzer divisions slice through Poland, France, and the Low Countries, with a speed and coordination that seemed unstoppable. Massed armour formations, supported by dive bombers and motorized infantry, achieving breakthrough and encirclement before defenders could react. American military planners concluded that stopping such attacks required dedicated tank destroyer units, not tanks designed to fight other tanks, but fast, agile tank killers that could rush to threatened sectors, ambush the panzer spearheads, and withdraw before German forces could respond. The concept was called the Tank Destroyer Doctrine. Speed, not armour, would provide protection. Mobility, not frontal firepower, would achieve kills. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce articulated the vision with stark clarity. Tank destroyers should be cruisers, not battleships. They should hunt, not defend. They should seek the flanks and rear of enemy armour, striking where German tanks were vulnerable, avoiding where they were strong. The doctrine demanded vehicles faster than any tank, with guns powerful enough to kill from ambush positions, and armour sufficient only to protect against small arms fire and shell fragments. Between 1941 and 1943, the Ordnance Department struggled to build such a vehicle. Early attempts mounted small guns on fast chassis. The M3 gun, motor carriage, featured a 75 mm gun on a half-track. Crews called it a Purple Heart box. Its thin armour and high profile made it a priority target. The M6 mounted a 37 mm gun on a Dodge truck. In North Africa, German gunners destroyed them with casual efficiency. The M10 Wolverine, based on the Sherman tank chassis, provided better protection and a more powerful 3-inch gun, but it weighed 30 tons and achieved a maximum road speed of 30 miles per hour. Bruce considered it too slow, too heavy, too much like a tank. He wanted something that could sprint across a battlefield, something that could appear, kill, and vanish before enemy gunners could traverse their turrets. In December 1941, the Ordnance Corps issued requirements for exactly such a vehicle: fast, lightly armoured, mounting a gun capable of defeating German medium tanks. The specifications evolved through multiple prototypes. First, the T-42 with a 37mm gun, then the T-49 with a 57mm, then the T-67 with a 75mm. Finally, in April 1943, Buick Motor Division delivered the first pilot model of what would become the M18. The design originated in Harley Earl's studio at General Motors. Earl, famous for automotive styling, approached tank destroyer design with an engineer's pragmatism rather than a tanker's caution. Reduce weight anywhere possible. Maximize power-to-weight ratio. Prioritize speed above all else. The M18 that emerged from Buick's design process weighed 17 tons. A Sherman tank weighed 30 tons. A Panther weighed 45. The M18's armour ranged from 7mm on the turret roof to 25mm maximum on the turret front and hull. By comparison, a Panther's frontal armour was 80mm thick, sloped at 55 degrees. The M18's crew sat in an open-topped turret, exposed to artillery fragments, grenades, and even small arms, fire from elevated positions. The choice was deliberate. Every pound of armour removed allowed another mile per hour of speed. Power came from a Continental R975 radial aircraft engine, the same power plant used in Sherman tanks. In a Sherman, this engine pushed 30 tons to a maximum speed of 25 miles per hour. In the M18, it propelled 17 tons to 55 miles per hour, on roads, 26 miles per hour cross-country. The Torquematic automatic transmission, innovative for its time, allowed rapid acceleration without the driver needing to manually shift gears under combat stress. Testing at General Motors' Milford Proving Ground validated the design's potential. On a specially banked oval track, fitted with experimental treads, an M18 reached 74 miles per hour, the fastest tracked armoured vehicle ever recorded. Production models, with standard tracks and combat loads, achieved a verified top speed of 55 miles per hour. No other armoured fighting vehicle fielded by any nation in World War II could match this velocity. The armament consisted of a 76mm M1, a one-gun, the same weapon being introduced on later Sherman variants. This gun fired the same ammunition as the M10's 3-inch gun, but from a different cartridge case. With standard armour-piercing rounds, it could penetrate 88mm of armour at 1,000 yards, theoretically sufficient to defeat a Panther's side armour, theoretically insufficient against its frontal plate. The M18 carried 45 rounds of 76mm ammunition, a mix of armour-piercing, high-explosive, and, when available, high-velocity armour-piercing rounds. The turret featured powered traverse, allowing the gunner to rotate the turret 360 degrees far faster than the manual or hydraulic systems on German tanks. In a flanking engagement, this meant an M18 crew could acquire and engage a target before a Panther crew could even train their gun on the threat. 5 men crewed each M18. Commander in the left rear of the turret, gunner left front, loader on the right, driver in the left front hull, assistant driver, who also operated the bow machine gun, in the right front hull. The open turret gave them unobstructed views of the battlefield. In ambush positions, this awareness proved decisive. Crews could spot targets earlier, assess threats faster, and coordinate movement better than tank crews peering through periscopes from closed vehicles. Production began in July 1943 at Buick's facility in Flint, Michigan. The Army had initially ordered 1,000 units. By October 1944, when production ended, Buick had delivered 2,507 M18s. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The relatively short production run reflected not inadequacy, but changing tactical requirements, and the introduction of the M36 Jackson, which mounted a 90mm gun on an M10 chassis. The first M18 battalion to enter combat was the Feat 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, which received its vehicles in spring 1944. The unit trained at Camp Hood, Texas, where the Tank Destroyer Center had been established. Training emphasized the doctrine: speed and maneuver, ambush and withdrawal. Never engage from positions where you can be flanked. Never remain in position after firing. Shoot and scoot. Crews learned to exploit terrain. A slight depression could conceal an M18's low profile. A tree line provided cover for rapid redeployment. Open ground that would be suicide for a Sherman became a racetrack for a Hellcat. Exercises pitted M18s against mock enemy armor. Crews practiced flanking maneuvers, calculating approach angles, estimating ranges, coordinating fire. The gunnery training was intensive. At 55 miles per hour, an M18 covered 80 feet per second. Firing accurately from a moving platform at that speed required skill, practice, and excellent vehicle suspension. The torsion bar, system designed by Buick engineers, provided a remarkably stable ride even at high speed over rough terrain. Crews learned to judge when to slow for accurate fire and when to rely on speed for survival. Maintenance training proved equally critical. The M18's engine sat on rails that allowed the entire power plant to slide out of the hull for service. This innovative design meant field mechanics could replace an engine in hours rather than days. The transmission, similarly, could be accessed and removed through large hull plates. Tank destroyers that should have been evacuated to rear area depots were kept operational through improvised repairs and aggressive maintenance. In June 1944, elements of the 704th, 705th, and 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalions shipped to England as part of the build-up for Operation Overlord. General Omar Bradley, commanding 1st Army, had declined to equip his units with M18s, preferring the heavier-gunned M36, but General George Patton, commanding 3rd Army, requested the Hellcats. Patton understood speed. His entire operational concept depended on rapid movement and aggressive exploitation. The M18 battalions came ashore in Normandy in late July 1944. They immediately found that combat in the bocage country of northern France did not favour their primary asset. The hedgerows and narrow lanes created kill zones where German anti-tank guns dominated. Speed meant little when every field was bordered by earth berms thick enough to stop a tank. The M18s found themselves assigned to infantry support roles, blasting pillboxes, suppressing machine gun positions, firing indirect fire missions. This was not what they had trained for. This was not the doctrine. Tank destroyer crews chafed at being used as assault guns. They had the fastest armoured vehicle in the world, and they were driving it at walking pace behind infantry squads, clearing hedgerows one field at a time. The frustration was palpable, but the breakthrough would come, and when it did, the M18 would finally demonstrate what speed could achieve. On August 1st, 1944, Operation Cobra shattered the German defensive line in Normandy. American forces poured through the gap. Patton's 3rd Army raced east toward the Seine, then wheeled north and south to encircle German forces in the Falaise pocket. The M18 battalions moved with Patton's armoured divisions, finally operating in the open terrain where their speed advantage mattered. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 4th Armoured Division, raced across France faster than any American unit before them. Towns fell so quickly that maps couldn't keep pace. The M18s demonstrated their ability to outpace supply lines, arriving at objectives with empty fuel tanks and depleted ammunition racks. Logistics officers scrambled to establish forward supply points. The Hellcats consumed gasoline and 76mm rounds faster than truck convoys could deliver them. By September 1944, Patton's advance had reached the Moselle River in northeastern France, near the city of Nancy. The 3rd Army had outrun its supply lines. Fuel shortages forced a pause. German forces, retreating in disorder just days earlier, established defensive positions along the Moselle, and Hitler, infuriated by the loss of France, ordered a counterattack. The 5th Panzer Army would drive west, recapture Nancy, and push the Americans back beyond the Meuse River. The German plan committed 2 panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th, to the offensive. These were not the depleted, exhausted units that had been mauled in Normandy. These were fresh formations, recently arrived from Germany, equipped with the latest tanks, Panzer IVs, and Panthers, lots of Panthers. The Panther tank represented German armoured engineering at its most sophisticated, designed in response to the Soviet T-34. The Panther combined firepower, protection, and mobility into what many historians consider the finest medium tank of World War II. Its 75mm Quai K42 litres, 70 gun, could penetrate 130mm of armour at 1,000 metres. Its sloped 80mm frontal armour, angled at 55 degrees, provided effective protection equivalent to 140mm of vertical plate. Its Maybach HL 230 engine generated 700 horsepower, pushing 45 tons to a top speed of 34 miles per hour on roads. The Panther's reputation on the battlefield was fearsome. American tank crews reported that their 75mm Shermans could not penetrate a Panther's frontal armour even at close range. The Germans knew this. Panther crews were trained to engage enemy tanks frontally, using their superior armour and gun to destroy opponents before those opponents could manoeuvre to the Panther's vulnerable flanks. The doctrine emphasized static defense or deliberate advances that kept the thick frontal armour oriented toward threats. What Panther crews were not trained for was enemies that moved at 55 miles per hour. The morning of September 19th, 1944, dawned foggy across the Lorraine countryside. Company C of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion occupied defensive positions around the villages of Rechicourt-la-Petite and Bézange-la-Petite, northeast of Arracourt. Intelligence reports had warned of German armour concentrating across the Moselle. The men of the 704th expected contact. What they did not expect was the size of the force moving toward them through the fog. The 113th Panzer Brigade, under the command of Major Franz Joseph von Nostitz, advanced in column formation. The fog provided concealment but also limited visibility to a few dozen meters. Von Nostitz's force consisted of approximately 30 Panthers and Panzer IVs, supported by Panzer Grenadier Infantry. The plan was straightforward: push through the American positions, establish control of the road network, and continue the advance toward Nancy. German intelligence assessed American forces in the area as light screening elements, tank destroyers perhaps, but American tank destroyers were M10 Wolverines, slow, based on the Sherman chassis, predictable. No one had briefed von Nostitz about the M18. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's platoon of 4 M18s occupied positions in a shallow depression near Rechicourt-la-Petite. The fog was so thick that Leiper could barely see his other vehicles. Radio discipline was strict. Engines idled quietly. Gunners peered through their sights, seeing nothing but grey mist. Then, at approximately 0630 hours, Leiper saw the gun muzzle, a dark cylinder emerging from the fog, perhaps 10 meters away. Behind it, the distinctive sloped armor of a Panther's hull. Leiper's gunner had perhaps 2 seconds to acquire the target. The Panther's crew had not yet spotted the American tank destroyer. The M18's turret traverse was already trained roughly in the correct direction. The gunner made a fractional adjustment, aimed not at the Panther's frontal armor, which was impenetrable to his 76mm gun, but at the side, where armor thickness dropped to 40mm, vertical, not sloped, vulnerable. The first round struck the Panther's side hull near the turret ring, armor-piercing ammunition travelling at 2,500 feet per second. The shell penetrated. Inside the Panther, the spalling effect sent metal fragments ricocheting through the crew compartment. The German tank lurched to a stop. Smoke began pouring from the engine deck. The gunfire shattered the morning quiet. The fog, which had concealed the German advance, now concealed the Americans. Leiper deployed his other 3 M18s by radio command. They spread into an L-shaped ambush formation, engines revving, 4 more German tanks emerged from the fog. They had heard the shot but could not locate its origin. Panthers were equipped with hydraulic turret traverse powered by the main engine. At idle speed, turret rotation was slow, 6 degrees per second maximum on early models. Even later models with improved systems needed the engine at high RPM to achieve faster traverse. The M18S had electric hydraulic turret drive, 18 degrees per second, independent of engine speed. In the time it took a Panther crew to rotate their turret 90 degrees, an M18 could traverse 360 degrees and return to the original bearing. In a turning fight, this was decisive. The M18 gunners acquired targets faster, fired faster, and repositioned faster than their German counterparts could react. In 5 minutes, 4 more German tanks were burning. The range varied from 30 feet to perhaps 200 yards. All kills were flank shots. All were achieved before the Panther crews could effectively return fire. One M18 was hit by a Panther that had successfully traversed its turret. The 75mm round struck the M18's turret at an angle, penetrating the thin armor and killing 2 crew members instantly. The vehicle was destroyed, but the other 3 M18s had already changed positions. This was the doctrine in action: shoot and scoot. Fire, then immediately relocate before enemy guns could range your previous position. The M18's speed made this possible. A Panther needed perhaps 30 seconds to traverse its turret, acquire a new target, and fire. In 30 seconds, an M18 travelling at 30 miles per hour could move a quarter mile. By the time German gunners spotted muzzle flashes and trained their weapons on those positions, the Hellcats were already gone. As the fog began lifting around 0700 hours, Captain Tom Evans, commanding Company C, assessed the situation. His platoons had knocked out 5 German tanks, but radio, intercepts, and the sounds of engines suggested a much larger force. Evans radioed for the rest of Company C to move up. 12 M18s total would engage what turned out to be 30 German tanks. The tactical problem was clear. The Germans had superior armor, superior guns, and superior numbers. In a static defensive position, the M18s would be destroyed. Their thin armor could not survive even a single hit from a Panther's main gun. But in a mobile battle, across open ground, the speed advantage could be exploited. Evans devised a plan that would test the doctrine to its limits. He positioned 1 platoon of 4 M18s in a visible position. These vehicles would serve as bait, drawing German fire and attention. The other 2 platoons would use the terrain to approach the German flanks from different directions. When the Panthers oriented their frontal armor toward the bait platoon, the flank platoons would attack from the sides and rear. The Germans would be forced to choose: engage and threat to their front or defend against the threats to their flanks. Either way, someone would be shooting at their vulnerable side armor. The German response was exactly as Evans predicted. Von Nostitz's Panthers formed a defensive line, frontal armor toward the visible American tank destroyers. German doctrine emphasized using the Panthers' superior frontal protection. Fire from behind cover. Force the enemy to approach across open ground into your kill zone. The Panthers opened fire at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Their 75mm guns were accurate at this distance. Several rounds struck near the American positions, forcing the bait platoon to withdraw behind a low ridge. The German crews did not see the 2 M18 platoons racing across open ground at 40 miles per hour, approaching from the flanks. The Panthers' turrets faced forward. Their relatively slow traverse speed meant shifting to engage flank threats required time. Time the Americans did not give them. The first flank attack struck the German left at approximately 0745 hours. 4 M18s appeared from behind a tree line, already moving at speed. The range was approximately 600 yards. The American gunners aimed for side shots. Panther side armor was 40mm thick, angled at 40 degrees on the upper hull side. The M18's 76mm armor-piercing rounds could penetrate this at combat ranges. The penetration was not guaranteed, but it was possible. and the M18s were firing multiple shots rapidly before the Germans could respond. The loader in an M18 turret could maintain a rate of fire approaching 6 rounds per minute with a well-trained crew. German loaders in the cramped Panther turret managed similar rates, but only if the turret was stationary and the target already acquired. When the turret was traversing, when the crew was searching for threats, the rate of fire dropped dramatically. The first indication many German crews had of the flank attack was armor-piercing rounds striking their vehicles. 3 Panthers were hit in rapid succession. One caught fire immediately, the crew bailing out. Another slewed to a halt, tracks destroyed. The third continued to fight, its crew frantically rotating the turret to engage the new threat. By the time the German gunner acquired a target, the M18s had already moved. They were 400 yards away now, on a different bearing, presenting different angles. The Panther fired and missed. The M18s fired again. This time, the Panther's engine compartment erupted in flames. The second flank attack struck from the German right nearly simultaneously. The Panthers were now receiving fire from 3 directions. Von Nostitz attempted to reorient his formation, but the speed of the American attack prevented coordinated response. Individual Panther commanders made individual decisions. Some attempted to engage the threats to their front. Others turned to face the flank attacks. This broke the defensive line's cohesion. It created gaps, and gaps in an armoured formation are fatal. The M18s exploited these gaps immediately. One Hellcat raced directly through the German line at full speed, appearing behind the Panthers before their crews could react. The rear armour of a Panther was 40 millimeters thick, vertical, even more vulnerable than the sides. The M18 fired 4 rounds in quick succession, destroying 2 Panthers from behind before German infantry could bring anti-tank weapons to bear. The Hellcat then accelerated away, disappearing behind a farm building before German gunners could track it. German Panzer grenadiers attempted to engage the fast-moving American tank destroyers with Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets. The Panzerfaust was effective but had limited range, approximately 60 meters maximum effective. The M18s were moving too fast and staying too far away. By the time infantry teams could set up and aim, their targets were already gone. The few shots fired missed. The infantry, trained to support tanks in combined arms operations, found themselves unable to protect their armour against an enemy that refused to close to infantry engagement range. By 08:30 hours, the battle had turned decisively against the Germans. 19 Panthers and Panzer IVs were burning or disabled. German crews were abandoning vehicles and retreating on foot. Von Nostitz attempted to rally his remaining tanks for a withdrawal, but American tank destroyers harassed the retreat, firing at extreme range, forcing German vehicles to remain buttoned up and limiting their ability to coordinate movement. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion's after-action report documented the engagement with clinical precision. 19 German tanks destroyed, 4 more damaged and abandoned, 7 M18s engaged, 3 destroyed, 4 damaged but repairable. The kill ratio was staggering, nearly 3-to-1 in favour of the lighter, supposedly inferior, American tank destroyers. But more significant than the numbers was what the battle revealed about mobility in armoured warfare. The engagement at Arracourt demonstrated that in open terrain, with skilled crews and proper tactics, speed could overcome armour. The M18's 55-mile-per-hour top speed allowed it to control engagement ranges. Its rapid turret traverse allowed it to acquire targets faster than German tanks could respond. Its relatively small size and low profile made it difficult to spot and track, and its tactical doctrine, emphasizing mobility over protection, proved devastatingly effective when executed properly. From the German perspective, the battle was incomprehensible. Panthers were designed to dominate medium tanks. Their armour was supposed to be impenetrable to American 76mm guns. Their 75mm KK-42 could destroy any American tank at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Yet they had been flanked, outmaneuvered, and were destroyed by tank destroyers they could barely track through their gun sights. Surviving German tank commanders reported their experiences to division headquarters. The Americans had tank destroyers faster than anything previously encountered. These vehicles appeared from unexpected directions, fired, and vanished before return fire could be directed. Their speed made traditional defensive tactics ineffective. The standard Panther doctrine of presenting frontal armor and engaging at range did not work when the enemy could reach your flanks in minutes. German intelligence officers examined destroyed M18s after the battle. What they found surprised them. Armor thickness was minimal, 1 inch maximum. The turret was open-topped. The entire vehicle weighed less than 20 tons. This was not a tank. It was barely armored at all. Yet it had destroyed Panthers with ease. The reports generated confusion and concern. If American forces were fielding vehicles this fast, how could German armor defend static positions? How could slower-moving Panthers prevent flanking maneuvers? The answer was that they could not without infantry support, not without proper reconnaissance, and not when outnumbered. The Battle of Arracourt exposed a fundamental weakness in German armoured doctrine. The Panthers had been designed to fight frontal engagements. Their thick frontal armour and powerful gun made them nearly invincible in such encounters. But when forced to defend against multiple threats from different directions, when unable to keep their frontal armour oriented toward danger, they became vulnerable. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion continued operations around Arracourt for 3 more days. By September 22nd, when the German offensive finally collapsed, the battalion had destroyed 39 German tanks and assault guns. The cost was 7 M18s destroyed and 3 damaged. The battle became a case study in tank destroyer doctrine. Speed and manoeuvre had defeated armour and firepower. But Arracourt was not typical. The terrain was unusually favourable for the M18. Open fields allowed high-speed movement, clear sight lines enabled long-range observation. Weather was dry, preventing the mud that could bog down even-tracked vehicles. And the German attack lacked proper reconnaissance. Von Nostitz's Panthers had advanced into an ambush without proper intelligence about American positions or capabilities. In different terrain, against a more cautious enemy, the results might have been very different. The M18's thin armour remained a critical vulnerability. A single hit from any German anti-tank weapon would penetrate. The open-topped turret exposed crews to artillery fragments, grenades, and small arms fire. In urban combat or heavily forested terrain, where speed provided less advantage, M18 suffered higher casualties. The 704th Battalion's overall wartime losses would be significant, though still favourable compared to their kill ratios. The 76mm gun also presented problems. Against heavier German tanks like the Tiger or King Tiger, even flank shots were not always effective. The gun lacked the penetrating power to defeat thick armour reliably. High-velocity armour-piercing ammunition helped, but supplies were limited. Most M18 crews fought with standard armour-piercing rounds that struggled against the heaviest German armour. Despite these limitations, the M18 Hellcat proved to be the most effective American tank destroyer of World War II by several metrics. It had the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armoured vehicle in the European theatre. Units equipped with M18s consistently reported favourable combat outcomes. The speed that tank destroyer doctrine demanded had finally been achieved, and in the right tactical circumstances, it was devastating. The lessons from Arracourt spread quickly through American armoured forces. Tank destroyer battalions began emphasising mobility, training even more heavily. Crews practiced shoot and scoot tactics until they became instinctive. Commanders learned to position M18s where their speed could be exploited. Infantry divisions that had been skeptical of tank destroyer doctrine began requesting M18 support, specifically for their speed and flexibility. German forces also adapted. After Arracourt, Panther units operated with increased caution. Reconnaissance became mandatory before advances. Infantry support was emphasized to protect against flanking attacks. Defensive positions were cited to limit the terrain available for high-speed maneuvers. Panthers remained formidable opponents, but German commanders now understood that their armour could be defeated by speed and superior tactics. The Battle of Arracourt occurred during a critical phase of the war in Europe. The Allied advance had paused to consolidate supply lines and prepare for the push into Germany. The German counterattack around Nancy was Hitler's attempt to regain initiative in the West. Its failure demonstrated that Germany no longer had the resources or tactical flexibility to mount successful offensive operations. The M18S of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had played a small but significant role in this larger strategic picture. The success at Arracourt made the M18 Hellcat a sought-after weapon, but the fall of 1944 brought challenges that would test the tank destroyer doctrine in ways its creators never anticipated. As American forces pushed toward the German border, they encountered terrain that favored defenders: the Siegfried Line fortifications, dense forests, river crossings, urban combat. None of these environments suited a vehicle whose primary asset was speed. In the Hürtgen Forest campaign, M18S of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion supported infantry operations in conditions that negated every advantage they possessed. The forest canopy limited visibility to a few dozen meters. Roads and trails were narrow, often muddy, always covered by German anti-tank guns sighted in prepared positions. Speed was impossible. Maneuver was restricted. The M18S moved at walking pace, supporting infantry attacks against bunkers and pillboxes. Their thin armour made them vulnerable to German infantry armed with Panzerfaust rockets. Several M18S were lost to handheld anti-tank weapons fired from close range in the dense forest. This was not what tank destroyer doctrine envisioned, but it was the reality of combat in late 1944. German forces no longer had the resources to mount massed armour attacks. The blitzkrieg that had justified creating tank destroyer battalions was over. Instead, German armies fought defensive battles, conserving their remaining tanks, using them to support infantry in static positions. The M18 battalions found themselves parcelled out to infantry divisions, providing direct fire support against fortifications. The fastest armoured vehicle in the world was being used as a mobile artillery piece. Then came December 16, 1944, and everything changed again. The German offensive in the Ardennes, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, was Hitler's last gamble in the West. 3 German armies attacked through the thinly held American lines in Belgium and Luxembourg. The goal was to reach Antwerp, splitting Allied forces and forcing a negotiated peace. The offensive committed Germany's last operational reserves, including its remaining panzer divisions. The massed armour attack that tank destroyer doctrine had been designed to counter was finally happening. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats, was attached to the 101st Airborne Division defending the town of Bastogne. When German forces encircled Bastogne on December 21st, the 705th was trapped inside the perimeter with the paratroopers. They had 18 M18S operational. Outside the perimeter, elements of the 2nd Panzer Division, equipped with Panthers and Panzer IVs, prepared to assault the town. The terrain around Bastogne was rolling countryside, covered in snow. Visibility was limited by winter weather, but the ground was open enough for mobile operations, and the M18S, despite being trapped in a defensive position, found ways to exploit their speed advantage. When German armour probed the perimeter, looking for weak points, Hellcats would race to threatened sectors faster than German commanders could coordinate their attacks. On December 19th and 20th, near the village of Neuville, just north of Bastogne, M18S of the 705th engaged advancing German armour in a desperate delaying action. The tanks from Team de Sobry, a combined task force from the 10th Armoured Division, had been holding Neuville but were being overwhelmed by superior numbers. 4 M18S moved to support them. The engagement that followed demonstrated the Hellcat's value in mobile defence. German tanks advancing through morning fog encountered M18S firing from multiple positions. The Hellcats would fire several rounds, then relocate to a different firing position before German gunners could return accurate fire. This shoot-and-scoot tactic confused German crews, who reported being engaged by more American tank destroyers than were actually present. The rapid relocation made it appear that multiple vehicles were firing from different locations simultaneously. The battle for Nouville raged through December 19th and into December 20th. American forces, outnumbered and low on ammunition, conducted a fighting withdrawal back to Bastogne's main defensive perimeter. The M18s provided covering fire, destroying at least 7 German tanks during the retreat. One Hellcat, commanded by Staff Sergeant Charles Hensel, engaged a Panther at a range of approximately 400 yards. The first shot struck the Panther's side turret, penetrating and causing an internal fire. The Panther's crew bailed out. Hensel's M18 then displaced to a new position and engaged another Panther, scoring a kill before German return fire forced withdrawal. The speed of the M18 proved critical during the withdrawal. Infantry and slower vehicles moved in convoy, while Hellcats provided mobile security, racing ahead to scout routes, then falling back to cover the rear against pursuing German forces. A Sherman tank moving at 25 miles per hour would have been caught by pursuing German armour. The M18s, capable of 55 miles per hour even on snow-covered roads, could break contact and re-establish defensive positions faster than German forces could pursue. By Christmas Day 1944, Bastogne had been surrounded for 4 days. German forces launched their strongest assault yet, attempting to break through American lines before relief forces could arrive. M18s of the 705th engaged German armour at multiple points around the perimeter. The fighting was intense and confused. Visibility was poor, radio communications were sporadic. But the M18 crews had learned their lessons at Arracourt: speed and manoeuvre, exploit the flanks, never remain in position after firing. The after-action reports from December 25th credited M18s with destroying 27 German tanks. 27. In a single day of fighting, 6 M18s were lost. The kill ratio remained extraordinarily favourable, even in defensive operations under siege conditions. The speed that seemed like a luxury in static warfare became essential in the fluid, chaotic battles around Bastogne. When German armour penetrated American lines at one point, M18s raced across the perimeter to plug the gap before breakthrough could be exploited. The relief of Bastogne on December 26th ended the immediate crisis, but fighting in the Ardennes continued through January 1945. M18 battalions supported the counter-offensive that pushed German forces back to their starting positions. The winter terrain was brutal. Ice made high-speed movement dangerous. Snow concealed obstacles and mines, but the M18s adapted. Crews learned to operate in winter conditions, using their speed more cautiously but still effectively. The Battle of the Bulge validated tank destroyer doctrine in ways that Arracourt had not. Arracourt had been an ambush, a tactical success, but a limited engagement. The Bulge was a sustained battle over weeks of fighting in terrible conditions against Germany's last operational panzer reserves. The M18s had proven they could operate defensively, offensively, in mobile warfare and static defense. Their speed remained their greatest asset, but crews had learned to use that speed in every tactical situation. From the German perspective, the M18 had become a serious problem. Tank commanders who had fought against American armour throughout the war noted that encounters with M18s were fundamentally different from encounters with Shermans. A Sherman could be engaged at range, destroyed from front on with the Panther's superior gun and armour. An M18 could not. It appeared from unexpected angles. It fired and vanished. It exploited terrain faster than German crews could react. Captured German tank commanders, interrogated by American intelligence officers after the war, consistently mentioned the speed of American tank destroyers. One Panther commander stated that engaging M18s required different tactics than engaging Shermans. Against Shermans, German crews relied on frontal armour and superior gun range. Against M18s, that approach failed. The Hellcats never gave you a frontal engagement. They appeared on your flank, fired, and were gone before you could traverse your turret. Another captured German officer noted that the Panther's slow turret traverse speed became a critical vulnerability when facing M18s. The Panther was designed for frontal engagements where turret traverse speed mattered less. But against an enemy that moved at 55 miles per hour and appeared from multiple directions, the inability to rapidly shift fire proved fatal. He recommended that future German tank designs prioritize faster turret traverse, even at the cost of some armor protection. These observations from German tankers reveal the psychological impact of the M18. German Panther crews had been confident in their vehicle's superiority. The Panther was better armored than American tanks. Its gun was more powerful. In frontal engagements, it usually won. This created a sense of technical superiority that reinforced morale. But encounters with M18s shattered that confidence. German crews learned that superior armor meant nothing if the enemy could shoot you from the side. Superior guns meant nothing if you could not hit a target moving at 55 miles per hour. The technical specifications told the story. The Panther weighed 45 tons, carried 80 millimeters of frontal armor, and moved at 34 miles per hour maximum. The M18 weighed 17 tons, carried 25 millimeters of maximum armor, and moved at 55 miles per hour. On paper, the Panther was obviously superior. In combat, when tactics and crew skill were factored in, the outcome was less certain. The M18 had proven that in armored warfare, mobility could compensate for inadequate armor and firepower. By March 1945, American forces were breaching the Siegfried Line and pushing into Germany proper. M18 battalions participated in the Rhine crossings and the subsequent pursuit operations across western Germany. The terrain varied from open farmland to urban areas to forested hills. In each environment, M18 crews adapted their tactics. In open country, they used their speed to outflank German positions. In forests, they moved more cautiously but still faster than heavier vehicles. In urban combat, they provided fire support from standoff ranges, using their mobility to rapidly reposition when counterfire became dangerous. The 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 6th Armoured Division, advanced through Bavaria in April 1945. They encountered German resistance that was increasingly disorganized but still dangerous. Panzerfaust armed infantry in small towns, isolated tanks fighting delaying actions, anti-tank guns covering withdrawal routes. The M18s destroyed these obstacles and kept the advance moving. Speed allowed them to bypass strong points that would have required lengthy reductions by infantry. Production of the M18 had ended in October 1944 after 2,507 units were built. The relatively short production run reflected both the success of the design and the changing tactical situation. The massed panzer attacks that justified tank destroyer doctrine were no longer happening by late 1944. German armor was increasingly scarce. American planners concluded that heavier-gunned tank destroyers, like the M36, with its 90mm gun, were more useful against the remaining German heavy tanks. The M18's 76mm gun was adequate against Panthers and Panzer IVs, but struggled against Tigers and King Tigers. Despite the end of production, M18s continued to serve through the end of the war in Europe. By May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered, M18 battalions had compiled impressive combat records. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion reported destroying 90-plus enemy armoured vehicles during the campaign in northwest Europe. The 603rd reported similar numbers. The loss rates varied by unit and tactical situation, but overall remained favourable. The M18 had achieved what tank destroyer doctrine promised: a vehicle that could hunt and kill enemy armour through speed and superior tactics. The statistical evidence supported this conclusion. The M18 had the best kill-to-loss ratio of any American armoured vehicle in the European theatre. Exact figures vary by source and methodology, but most accounts agree the ratio exceeded 2-to-1, with some estimates reaching 8-to-1 in optimal tactical situations like Arracourt. No other American tank or tank destroyer approached these figures. The M18's speed, when properly exploited by trained crews, proved to be a war-winning advantage, but the M18's success came with costs that statistics did not capture. The open-topped turret exposed crews to dangers that closed turret vehicles avoided. Artillery fragments, grenades, small arms fire from elevated positions. Several M18 crew members were killed or wounded by threats that would not have penetrated a closed turret. The thin armor meant that any hit was likely to penetrate. Crews lived with the knowledge that a single shot from any German anti-tank weapon would destroy their vehicle. This created psychological stress. M18 crews could not rely on armor for protection. They had to rely on not being hit. That meant constant vigilance, constant movement, never remaining in one position, never presenting a stationary target. The mental strain of this approach to combat was significant. Tank crews in Shermans or Pershings could sometimes shelter behind their vehicle's armor. M18 crews had no such luxury. Their survival depended on speed, situational awareness, and tactics. The pressure was relentless. Yet the crews who mastered these demands became highly effective. Veterans of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion described a confidence that came from knowing their vehicle could outrun and outmaneuver anything they faced. They understood their vulnerabilities, but they also understood their advantages. In the right hands, the M18 was deadlier than vehicles twice its weight and 3 times as well armored. That knowledge created a distinct identity. M18 crews saw themselves not as substitute tankers, but as specialist hunters, predators, not prey. The doctrine that created the M18 had been controversial from the beginning. Many officers in the armored force believed that tank destroyers were unnecessary. They argued that tanks should fight tanks, that creating a separate tank destroyer branch divided resources and complicated command structures. The debate continued throughout the war, but units like the 704th at Arracourt provided empirical evidence that tank destroyer doctrine, properly executed, could achieve results that conventional armor could not. The M18's post-war career was limited. The United States Army declared the vehicle obsolete in 1957. The tank destroyer branch itself was disbanded in the post-war reorganization. The concept of dedicated tank destroyer units did not survive into the Cold War. Future American armored doctrine emphasized main battle tanks that could fulfill multiple roles. The specialization that created the M18 was abandoned in favor of versatility. But the M18 influenced tank design philosophy for decades. The emphasis on mobility as a form of protection, the value of high power-to-weight ratios, the importance of rapid turret traverse. These principles, demonstrated by the M18 in combat, informed the development of post-war tanks worldwide. The Soviet T-54 and T-55 series emphasized speed and agility alongside armor and firepower. The American M60 and later M1 Abrams prioritized mobility through powerful engines and advanced suspensions. The M18 had proven that speed was not just a luxury but a critical combat requirement. Several M18s saw service in subsequent conflicts. The vehicle was exported to various Allied nations in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Yugoslavia operated M18s into the 1990s. Using them in the Balkan conflicts. The vehicles were obsolete by modern standards but still functional. The basic design was sound. The speed remained impressive, even compared to modern armored vehicles. An M18 from 1944 could still reach 55 miles per hour in the 1990s. Most modern main battle tanks struggle to exceed 45 miles per hour. The legacy of the M18 Hellcat extends beyond its combat record or its influence on tank design. The vehicle represents a philosophical approach to warfare, the belief that mobility and initiative can overcome material disadvantage, that speed is a weapon, that the best armor is not being there when the enemy fires. These principles applied not just to tank destroyers, but to military operations generally. Maneuver warfare, combined arms operations, Tempo and initiative. The M18 demonstrated these concepts in the most demanding testing ground imaginable. Actual combat against a determined and skilled enemy. The men who crewed the M18s in combat understood this intuitively. They knew their survival depended on moving faster, thinking faster, and acting faster than their opponents. They trained relentlessly to achieve the split-second decision-making that speed required. They developed tactics that exploited their advantages and minimized their vulnerabilities. They transformed a vehicle that many considered inadequately protected into the most lethal tank destroyer America fielded in World War II. The German tankers who faced M18s in combat learned to respect them. After dismissing American armor as inferior to German designs, Panther crews discovered that technical superiority did not guarantee tactical success. A vehicle with 1 inch of armor had destroyed Panthers protected by 3 inches of sloped steel. A gun that could not penetrate frontal armor had killed from the flanks before German crews could respond. The fundamental assumptions of armored warfare were being challenged by the simple reality that speed created opportunities that armor could not prevent. In the final analysis, the M18 Hellcat succeeded because it was designed around a 3-parts arrested, clear doctrine and employed by crews who understood that doctrine. Tank destroyer battalions trained to exploit speed. They practiced shoot and scoot tactics until they became instinctive. They learned to read terrain for concealment and maneuver. They understood that their vehicle demanded a different approach to combat than a conventional tank, and when given the opportunity to fight according to their training, they excelled. The battle at Arracourt on September 19, 1944, was not an anomaly. It was the doctrine working as designed. M18s using speed and maneuver to defeat superior German armor. The engagement at Nouville during the Battle of the Bulge was not luck. It was trained crews executing tactics they had practiced for months. The overall kill-to-loss ratios achieved by M18 battalions throughout the war were not statistical flukes. They were the measurable result of matching vehicle design to tactical doctrine and training crews to exploit that match. The M18 proved that in armored warfare, speed matters as much as armor and firepower, perhaps more. A tank that cannot be hit does not need thick armor. A gun that can fire from the flank does not need to penetrate frontal armor. A vehicle that can control the terms of engagement through superior mobility can defeat heavier, more powerful opponents. These lessons, bought with blood in the fields of France and the forests of Belgium, remain relevant today. Modern main battle tanks emphasize mobility alongside protection and firepower. The concept of the traditional heavy tank, slow but heavily armored, has been abandoned. Current designs feature powerful engines, advanced suspensions, and sophisticated transmissions that prioritize speed. The M1 Abrams, despite weighing 70 tons, can reach 45 miles per hour cross-country. This emphasis on mobility reflects lessons learned from vehicles like the M18. Speed is survival. Mobility is protection. The ability to choose when and where to fight is worth more than inches of steel plate. The M18 Hellcat remains one of the most remarkable armoured vehicles of World War II, not because it was the best protected or the most heavily armed, but because it demonstrated that a different approach to armoured combat could succeed. It proved that doctrine, training, and tactics could compensate for material disadvantages. It showed that speed was not just an attribute but a weapon, and it validated the vision of men like Andrew Davis Bruce, who insisted that tank destroyers should be cruisers hunting on the battlefield, not battleships slugging it out toe-to-toe with enemy armour. The crews who fought in M18s from Normandy to the Rhine knew they had been given a unique weapon. They understood its limitations. The thin armour, the open turret, the gun that could not penetrate heavy armour frontally, but they also understood its advantages. The speed that let them appear where the enemy did not expect, the agility that let them survive when heavier vehicles would have been destroyed. The doctrine that gave them permission to fight smart rather than tough. They took those advantages and created one of the most successful combat records in American armoured history. When German Panther crews saw M18s approaching at 55 miles per hour, firing on the move, vanishing behind terrain before return fire could be directed. They understood that armoured warfare had changed. The certainties that had made the Panther seem invincible were no longer certain. Armour did not guarantee survival if the enemy could reach your flanks. Gun range did not ensure victory if you could not hit a moving target. Technical superiority was not decisive if the inferior vehicle was crewed by better-trained soldiers using better tactics. The M18 Hellcat was never designed to be the best tank destroyer in the world. It was designed to be the fastest, to embody a doctrine that prioritized mobility over protection, to give American forces a tool for hunting enemy armor through speed and maneuver rather than direct confrontation. By that measure, it succeeded brilliantly. The vehicle did exactly what its designers intended, and in doing so, it changed how armies thought about armored combat for generations to come. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.